So I want to have a look at a live stream by academic agent Neema Parvini and a couple of other guys, Simon Roberts and another guy. And they're looking at Ayn Rand and they're discussing libertarianism, I guess. So the problem is that people identify right-wing libertarianism with Ayn Rand. And the problem is that it seems to me that most of the criticisms of right-wing libertarianism are perhaps valid as criticisms of the Ayn Rand approach, which is a kind of an ideology. It's not really an economic theory, right? It's more an ideology of capitalism and perhaps individualism, whereas Austro-libertarianism is based in economic theory. And I had a look at the Ayn Rand philosophy, so let's have a look at that before we look at academic agents live stream. So according to ChatGPT, Ayn Rand was not an anarchist and was explicitly opposed to anarchism. Her philosophy, Objectivism, advocates for a specific type of political system, laissez-faire capitalism. Well, is that coherent, right? Because already, if you have the state, it's going to interfere with the market. You can't have a state without some interference in the market. If the state is, if it's a completely laissez-faire system, then that's just anarchy. So she believed that laissez-faire, which means let do capitalism, so free market capitalism, she believed that it required a limited government to protect individual rights. So on the Austro-libertarian position, the state is monopoly of violence in a particular area. You can have governance, you can have enforcement of private property without a monopoly on the violence when you have multiple sources of enforcement, you see? So you can have private property and enforcement of private property without monopoly by any particular agency. You can have multiple agencies overlapping in a particular area, okay? And so this limits their ability to expropriate involuntarily, okay? The state for example, when the state taxes, that is involuntary expropriation. It's not a fee. Because if, for example, some agency comes to me and says, you have to pay me X amount, and I say, I don't want to, I'm going to go to this other agency to protect me from you expropriating me. Anarchism means that you have multiple agencies, and if you want something done, like let's say you want security, it's up to you who gives you that security. You don't have to rely on the police system provided by a particular agency, which happens to be the current monopoly, and so they force you to use their particular form of security, whether you like it or not. Like here in Australia, I don't like the police at all. I disagree with, but I have no choice. I have no option other than to pay taxes for the services, right, of the Australian police, which I think is ridiculous. Anyway, however, some people influenced by her ideas about individualism and freedom may mistakenly associate her with anarchism or attempt to blend her views with anarchist principles. This creates some confusion as there is a significant philosophical divide between Rand's objectivism and anarchist thought. So she believes in limited government, but she rejected the idea of a stateless society because she believed that without government, society would devolve into chaos or ruled by force. And she focuses on individual rights. Her philosophy prioritizes individual rights, property rights, and free markets. She believed these could only flourish under a system of objective law administered by a neutral government. You see, on the Austro-libertarian position, the state, in particular democratic state, is incompatible with private property. So they're contrasting her with left-wing anarchism. Radical individualism. Rand's emphasis on radical individualism and personal freedom may superficially resemble anarchist ideas about autonomy. However, her vision of individualism is rooted in a framework that requires government protection of rights, making her views fundamentally statist. Yes, so you see, I don't think that Austro-libertarianism is individualistic in that way. That sounds actually quite liberal and socially liberal to me. Okay. Because, for example, the Austrians will ask, well, what is their position on baking the cake? Right. So social liberals will say, well, if you, and actually, I've had that conversation here in Australia with libertarians. Not all of them, but there was one libertarian account from Canberra. And I said, well, I believe in freedom of association. And they go, yeah, we believe in freedom of association. I said, well, I believe that if you're a Christian, you don't have to bake the cake for a gay wedding. And they were like, but you would cause harm. You see, we are against harm. You're causing harm. If you refuse services, you're causing harm. You see, and now their concept of harm is different from the concept of private property, where if this is my private property and you now enter this property and you try to take it, you are now using violence. Like I can use violence to protect you're causing violence against me. Their concept of violence, this libertarian here in Australia, the concept of violence is if I don't bake the cake, if I'm a Christian baker and I refuse to bake the cake for a gay wedding because it's against my religion, you see, now I'm causing violence. So it's my property, it's my business, but now I can't do whatever I want with it. I have to bake the cake. That's anti-private property. But their concept of individualism means that if you don't bake the cake, you are now against my individual freedom. You're impinging in some way on my individual freedom. And so the question is whether Ayn Rand, how is she thinking about that? So Rand views only the initiation of forces. So both Rand and anarchists critique coercion, but her definitions differ. Anarchists see all state authority as coercive, whereas Rand views only the initiation of force as coercion and sees government as necessary to prevent it. And so the question is, well, if I refuse to bake the cake, is that an initiation of force? You see, because here the state will force me to not discriminate. They see discrimination as violence. If I'm discriminating, then that's violence. That's initiation. They define discrimination in the sense like if I refuse to bake the cake, I'm discriminating. And for them, according to their definition, that's initiation of force because it's violence. Discrimination is hate. You see, I don't have to do anything. By not doing something like not baking a cake, I am now being hateful. So non-action and decision with respect to my own private property is now hateful and therefore violent. You see, so they have a particular definition of what constitutes violence. For example, they see certain types of language as violence, and they can imprison you for using words in certain ways. Like in the US, using the N word is violence, and therefore initiation of violence or initiation of force. You're using language as force. Okay, here it talks about anarcho-capitalists. There are some people who attempt to blend Rand's ideas with anarcho-capitalism, a branch of right-wing anarchism. So that's me. These individuals advocate for a stateless society where markets replace the functions of government, but their philosophy diverges significantly from Rand's. Key differences: Rand rejected anarcho-capitalism, believing it could not provide the objective legal framework needed to protect individual rights. So you see, again, sorry, I didn't show you that. So again, they're talking about individual rights, and you need the state to provide a legal framework to protect individual rights. And that's very suspect. That's very suspect, you see, because what does that mean in detail? Overlap. Anarcho-capitalists, like Rand, support free markets and private property, but they reject her insistence on the necessity of government. So she was not an anarchist or an ANCAP. Okay. So I'm going to pursue this line of inquiry further, but let's have a look at Neema Parvini's academic agents live stream, and let's make comments on that.
I've never made a video on it. Maybe I should. All right, let's carry on.
Ideas were seen as mad and dangerous. Selfishness and greed had led to the financial chaos and the depression of the 1930s.
So they're looking at a documentary on Ayn Rand and the Silicon Valley, tech bros, all these Silicon Valley companies. Let's have a look.
The job of politics was to manage and control the selfish desires of the individual. But Rand continued to write, and a small group of followers began to form round her, who believed in her vision of another kind of world, where everyone was free.
I was 19 when I met Ayn. I was very idealistic, and she appealed to everything that was idealistic in me. We are heroic, we can know the world, we can tame nature, we can achieve our goals, we can do what we want. What does it matter that we're alone? Who do we need? Why do we need anyone? We have ourselves.
And that was enough.
And that was for sure enough, yes.
I think it's worth pointing out that Ayn Rand, as we've seen during this, used certain connections to get various jobs and publications already. So we've seen that even in her own life, there's a certain degree of collectivism that has played a part in her success. It's not entirely true that it's entirely self-derived. And this is one of the things that kind of slightly winds me up about this whole doctrine, which is that they never see their own,
I'm not completely against ad hominem arguments, but I feel that, I was watching this live stream last night and actually commented on in the chat. And my general impression is that it's just a bunch of ad hominems. So first of all, they look at Ayn Rand as representative of right libertarianism. And as I just said, she's not an ANCAP, and she's not based in economics. So the question is, well, what is her theory? What is her philosophical argument? Instead, what we're getting is a kind of a biographical, okay, people gathered around her, she got jobs. So it's all really like just one giant ad hominem argument. And unless you're training philosophy, if you're not training philosophy, an ad hominem is a type of argumentative fallacy where you're not attacking the argument, you are attacking the person. So you're saying this person is bad, or this person did this, that, or the other, and therefore their argument is invalid. Well, that's not a valid form of argument, because an argument can be a good argument, can be a valid argument, can be well reasoned out, even if it's given by a person who's bad. And Parvini seems to accept it when he's talking about Lenin. He says, well, Lenin was a bad person, but here his argument is predictive, and therefore it might be valid and worth considering. Whereas here he's going, well, look at her, she's getting jobs. Well, yeah, but the question is, well, what's her argument, right? But so far, for a significant part of the discussion, I'm not going to continue, talking about this, but a lot of it to me is just ad hominems. So there are two problems really that I identify with the discussion. One, it seems to be an argument against right libertarianism that doesn't acknowledge that Ayn Rand is only one variety of right libertarianism. So they don't really point this out, which I think is a problem, because I worry that people will get the wrong impression that somehow this is what right libertarianism is. But it's only one variety, and the variety that I subscribe to significantly differs.
Their own kind of non-selfishness to each other. And in fairness to Milton Friedman, for us, who I was talking about earlier on, Friedman actually addresses this head on at one point and says, look, it's not individualism, it's families. Right? When we're talking about the individual, actually we're talking about the entire family unit, right? But he never actually explains what the family is, right? So the family could be, you're thinking of the 2 point.
Again, Friedman is another variety of right libertarianism, but the thing is, he's a statist. He's obviously a statist. He believed in UBI. He believed in monetary policy. He believed in the state engaging in the market. Okay. So, and he's quite different in many ways from Austro-libertarians in how he thought about economy. Now, he was more free market than the Keynesians, but not a, he was he was actually quite significantly on the side of the Keynesians. Okay, he just probably didn't. I mean, the Chicago boys went to Chile, and they did a good job in Chile, where Chile became the most successful economy in South America. But they didn't get rid of the state. I think Milei is more anti-state than the Chicago boys. He wants to get, he's more on the Austro-libertarian side than the Chicago boys. But what I do know is that Austro-libertarians do not agree with Milton Friedman. And the issue of individualism is not really, it seems to be a red herring, because the issue is private property. So I guess you can have, a family owning property and different forms of organization. But in the end, it's individuals that are acting and individuals that are making decisions. And when you have boards of directors, then they have to vote, right? We talk about Tesla, the guy, he was the inventor. We talk about Elon Musk. An entrepreneur is an individual. You can have a group of people, right? But they all have their individual motivations and ideas and incentives, okay? And you don't really have this idea of a collective mind, that you can have this collective. Now, we're going to talk about sort of like emergent collective mind in a minute. But I think the idea is that in the basic kind of action is actions of individuals. Even when you're voting as an individual, right? So to reach, let's say, the board of directors of a company. But once you start getting to a point where everything has to be voted on, I think voting might have a certain, role in society. But when you're a firefighter and there's a fire and you need to go in and rescue someone, you're on your own. I mean, it's just you got to make the decision that you're going to go in. That kind of stuff, right? Most actions in society are really actions of individuals. They're not all negotiated collectively. At least most of the stuff I do, it's just my decisions. Like for me to make this video, that's my decision. Is that individualism? Am I being an individualist? I make decisions and choices as an individual, like how I spend my time, how I spend my money. Am I being an individualist? When you start using the ist words, the clarity sort of starts getting sucked out of the conversation. Socialist, collectivist. Do you know what I mean? This society is collectivist. This society is individualist. You can have collectivist values or individualist values, right? And you can argue about, the values, but when you're talking about individualism, is that okay? So individualist values. So you value competition. Well, another way of looking at it is competition is just a reality. And the question is, do you deal with competition by central planning, top-down fiat, or do you allow people to make individual choices and you have emergent sort of collectivist decision making that's emergent from individual choices? So let's have a look. We're just getting, this is gonna come up next.
If I say family to an Iranian, like we were talking about earlier on, they're not just thinking about, mum, dad, and kids. They're thinking about, their uncle and their cousin and their second cousin and,
Clan.
The entire clan. Or just remember watching Seinfeld, Uncle Leo, right? Oh, hey, there's Uncle Leo again, So it's the entire, the family can expand quite a lot. And in fairness to Milton Friedman, he is more honest about this, in my opinion, than the likes of Rand, who's just really going for this almost cartoonish John Wayne individualism here.
Well, it's similar to Leo Strauss in or whatever that, To Power of Nightmares, where you adopt the noble lie. The great irony that Rand.
Well, yeah, but the thing is that Ayn Rand came from Russia. Her family had a business. Her father had a business, something like that. We can have a look at it. And the communists took everything. And that's what happened to my family. Like, I come from an upper middle class family. We had property. We had social status. We had, all of that was taken away by communists. And then you go, okay, because they go collective good, the greater good, you've got to give up everything. And then we'll go to a point where you can't even have to give up your bourgeois status because, just like now, the wokeists are saying, well, you are privileged, you have white privilege. I have bourgeois privilege because I'm educated, I'm intelligent, I'm literate, and therefore I'm privileged. And the socialists don't like it. You even have to give up your reading habits or your manners, proper grammar, So that's what collectivism means. You have to sacrifice yourself for the country, for the society, for the whatever, right? And if you engage in behavior, and here in Australia, for example, there's something called the tall poppy syndrome, and it's a real thing, right? Which is why I don't really belong in this society. It's extremely communistic in its mentality, where one of the reasons I have retained an accent, even though I came here at 10 or 11 years old, is that Australians value proletarian behavior and proletarian manner of speaking. And I'm trying to do my best, but my nasal cavities are limited. I mean, but the whole thing with the way Australians behave, the way they speak, that is a proletarian style. It's completely antithetical to me as an upper middle class Polish European person. And so this was a psychological barrier for me in terms of learning English or wanting to interact with Australians, because they don't value reading. These people don't read. Okay, I mean, it's not a literate society, and actually, Cameron McGregor pointed out that, like in Argentina, people read, and then you go to these, like you go to Spain, you go to Madrid, you go on the subway, and everyone's got a book. Was here, reading, some people do it, but it's not, and they don't really value kind of intellectual stuff other than the anarchist socialist stuff. If you want to be an intellectual, you've got to be basically a communist. It's this kind of stuff. And so this is what collectivism means, it's the tall poppy syndrome, right? And Ayn Rand came to the US and she goes, well, here I am allowed to compete and succeed. And that's what a lot of people who migrate to these countries expect. Now, if you made the massive mistake, if you're that of that mind, and you migrated to Australia, it was a huge mistake. Okay, because it's not an individualist country, and now it's more obvious than ever. But it's never been really individual. Maybe up to a certain point, I don't know. It's materialistic. It's vapid materialism, but it's not individualistic. It's not competitive, and they don't like competition. They love government jobs. They love government solving things, and it's setting this place back. I mean, this place could be heaven on earth, and it's just crap. And I really can't wait to get out of here. But I'm kind of stuck. But for that reason, right? And people migrated to the US because in Europe, in particular in Eastern Europe, their ambition was stifled. They weren't able to work and succeed. Now you can call it individualism. Is that informative? What are you saying? Okay, I want to work, I want to make money, I want to save money, I want to succeed, I want to max out on my talent and work ethic and conscientiousness. I want to be the best version of myself. Now, we're in the UK and we don't like that. We're socialist. Well, the reason why people leave UK and go to the US is precisely because they don't want that collectivist mindset. So it's not individualism and collectivism, it's the collectivist mindset. It's a mindset. What she's expressing is a mindset, and what you're expressing is a mindset. You can say it's a culture, it's a cultural mindset, but it's a mindset. And people go to the US precisely because they prefer the individualist mindset. And now you're in the UK, you're not one of those people, and now you're going to critique it on the basis of what? She's expressing a cultural preference or cultural attitude. I don't know whether she is like Austro-libertarians. Yeah, that's part of it, but it's theoretically based in praxeology. Okay, so it's saying that wherever you are, if you want your economy to reach its full potential, you need a free market system. It's a different argument than saying, come from Russia, my family was involuntarily expropriated by the communists for the greater good, collective good. I don't like it. The US gives me the opportunity to achieve, to be the best version of myself. I like that. And I believe that that is the best system. It doesn't say anything about the family, because you can have an extended family and still have that mindset. You might have 10 kids and say, you go out and you make as much money as you can. Of course, have a family, make babies, but, engage in business, engage in free enterprise. don't rely on the government helping you out. It has nothing to do with family, right? It has to do with the role of the state and versus private property. So it's if you want to use the word individualism, it's more to do with the mindset. Like, do you believe that the government, like, if there's a problem, do you say instinctively the government should do something about it? You see, that's not an individualist mindset. If you're saying, oh, there's a problem, the government needs to do something about it. Where's the family in that? It has nothing to do with family. It has to do with central planning and central, government provided services and regulations. Should this problem be solved by the state? Is the state the way to solve this problem, or is it the free market? Here's a problem. You can have the state solving this problem, like, say, fires in California. You can say, we need to vote in a better government. Right? This one guy said, we need to stop voting these people in. We should have voted this other guy in, and he would have been more competent. But an ANCAP will say, no, what you should do is you should privatize firefighting and insurance and fire insurance. Like, deregulate and privatize. Don't expect the government to do a good job, because, you see, it depends on who happens to be voted in, right? So you're making your security a function of the voting system. And the ANCAP saying the voting system of consumers paying for insurance, for services, is the better voting system. Let's continue.
And calls a little pod of people the collective, and yet advocates for this sort of fierce individualism. It's similar to Leo Strauss in To Power of Nightmares, where you adopt the noble lie. The great irony that Rand calls her little pod of people the collective, and yet advocates for this sort of fierce individualism. She's kind of wanted to take advantage of that little in-group of hers, versus everybody else has to kind of be isolated and thrusting. And
this is just language games. This is just kind of slippage in meaning, because she's an individualist. She believes that you should be free from to pursue your goals. Then that means fierce individualism and atomization. Well, you've just put words in her mouth. Does she say that? If you're going to make that argument, like, I don't know. I actually never read her stuff. It just never attracted me, because I've been following when I was like getting into the whole libertarian thing, I was following libertarian YouTube channels and stuff like that. And nothing that they said really attracted me all that much. So I never really read her Atlas Shrugged. But if you want to make that argument that she believes in an atomized individual, and therefore the fact that she has a group of people with her is contradicted by that, well, you better pull out, like where she says that fierce individualism. I see no problem with being fiercely individualistic and having friends. In fact, like people like, for example, Doug Casey, he's one of these, libertarians. He has friends. He's on Zoom calls with his rich buddies, but he advocates individualism. Individualism is a mindset. It means individual responsibility, learning about economics, not expecting the government to save you. This is my understanding of it. Not that I don't have friends or I don't have a group of people that I can rely on. In fact, it's the opposite. I think if you're an individualist, you need to make sure that you have some friends to rely on because you don't expect the government to save you.
Essentially alone. Sorry, Horace.
Well, I was just going to say, all these philosophers like Rand, Friedman, also Mises, Rothbard, also Leo Strauss, are all of Jewish background, right? Jews do seem to be part of what you said about like sort of the Middle East there, that like, and then just a more sort of Eastern Oriental way of doing things where family is just thought of in much more extended terms. And like extended family means more, whereas I think it is quite uniquely maybe Aryan or like, I don't know, waspish to think almost entirely of the nuclear family and think of everyone else as kind of distant.
Yeah,
when talking about the individual, they are not necessarily, they don't mean someone disembedded from society. But a lot of sort of waspy people will take.
I mean, the thing is that, I can see there's libertarians in the chat talking about, well, this doesn't matter because it's voluntary association at the end of the day, voluntary association. But the trouble is that if you have a society where a lot of people are taking the individual to mean literally just the individual or like the small nuclear family, and then you've got other people who have got a much more expansive definition of what that means.
It was me, by the way, that he mentioned it because I mentioned voluntary association. Somewhere here, it's voluntarism.
And take the entire clan. I mean, we've already seen it with the more visible, I guess, with the Indians now, right? You have this in-group preference, I guess you call it, and a certain degree of nepotism. But the group, right, who looks out for each other in that way, in that kind of clannish and tribal manner, will defeat the people who are disparate and atomized, and 10 times out of 10.
And actually, I actually think that if you're an individualist, if you, in a sense that you believe you're individualistic, you believe that you are in the market, you're competing, you're going to be more realistic about this kind of stuff. Because it was when I was a socialist that I believed in the whole idea that if I get my education, if I get like a PhD, that the state is going to make sure that it's all kind of meritocratic and I get my piece of paper and I'm going to get a job. And then when I saw how things actually run, that it is all nepotistic and ethnocentric hiring in academia. It was so in your face, by the way. The ethnocentric hiring in academia was so, it's basically ethnocentric and ideological. And I didn't know that. And when I realized this, I was already so invested in my education. And had I been, more libertarian minded, I would have learned other business skills, something else like the way I did later on. But when you believe that the government and the socialist system, there's this welfare state, this nanny state, is going to make sure that, if you follow and it's all going to be, and then I realized that the goalposts, they keep moving the goalposts. And then they will tell you it's all meritocratic, and if you study hard, you're gonna, and do well. But then you realize that you do that, and then just move the goalposts because fundamentally, it's all nepotistic. And when you realize that, that is the best way to become a libertarian, because you realize, the government, the collective isn't going to save you. Okay. All these people working for the government, if it's this ethnicity that dominates that particular part of the government, like let's say public housing, if it's all people of that particular ethnicity in that department, they will just give the housing to their ethnic conspecific, their own people. And that's how, it's all nepotistic. It's all ethnocentric hiring, ethnocentric distribution of resources. And then you go, well, okay, so then I go, okay, so should I fall back on my Polish identity? And I had the choice of going, okay, well, should I go back to my community and see, what they've got? And I basically here, they don't really have anything. There's not enough Poles, and they don't really occupy enough positions. And actually, when I got jobs in my early 20s, like my first job, there was basically Polish guys, Polish managers giving me those jobs. Not all of them, but 2 of the jobs that I got were basically Polish guys. And it's because they go, oh, it's Polish guy, okay, you're in. So that is the reality, that is the norm. But then the question is, well, if your ethnic group does not have these resources, then you can either go for the nanny state and see what is the nanny state gonna hand me out, or you can become an individualist and go, okay, I've got to engage in the free market, in business, and learn business skills. And you have to become individualist. You develop that individualistic mindset. And that's why I got into English teaching, because I realized that there's gonna be always jobs in teaching English. Like it's a big market, and if I want to always be able to get a job teaching English, it's a no-brainer. I mean, I'm not gonna be paid well but at least I'm not gonna be stuck out of work, right? And that's actually worked pretty well, up to a point. So that's when I started thinking in terms of the market and supply and demand, and which skills are always going to be in demand. And because the English language market is so large, okay, that, you might be not paid the best, but you always get a job if you want. And that's what I mean. I mean, you got to think in terms of the market. Is it individualistic? Well, it's not thinking in terms of the nanny state. That's what she means. Don't expect the government and not the collective to save you. You've got to engage in the free enterprise market system. I don't know what's so complicated about that. It's so simple. Is the UK so socialistic? And I think this is the problem I have with all of this, is that the US and the UK, there's so much, and in the previous video, I was looking at this American academic. They're just promoting this communism, and I think it's so destructive. It's just so unhelpful. Okay, and it's really leading people astray. And I think there needs to be some pushback, and that's what I'm doing right now. Anyway, let's continue with this stream.
10 times out of 10, they will win out. Okay, and as much kind of bootstrapping boomer talk or John Wayne style individualism and tough, daddy government and all this sort of, macho talk that you get sometimes from certain types of libertarians, still cannot stand up to the fact that the person who's just going to give the job to their nephew, their uncle, etc., and they're just going to, oh well, okay, I own a newspaper, I'll give that job to my nephew or my son, and
There's no contradiction in any of that. It's not collectivism. Collectivism is the state. If I have a company and I give jobs to my family, that is not anti-individualistic. I don't understand why it's so difficult to understand that. I'm successful. I give jobs to my family or my ethnic group. It's my choice. It's my company. That's individualism. It's private property. It's when you have the state, okay, which doesn't produce anything. It can only expropriate. Now, I don't know which side of Ayn Rand is in this, right? Ayn Rand, but I do understand that she prefers the American free enterprise system, and she wanted to promote that. And I just don't see the contradiction between that and this nepotism. In fact, nepotism is part of the free market. I mean, it's just the discussion seems to be like word games, in a sense that they take a word like individualism and they go, well, it's all nepotism and therefore it's not individualism. Well, what does she mean by individualism? She means you make your individual choices. If I choose to employ my family members, that's my choice. If they choose to work for me, it's their choice. No one's forcing anyone here. We're all doing voluntary stuff. We're all making our individual choices. I choose to work for my uncle, or I choose to give jobs to my nephew. That's not collectivistic. It's voluntary. It's individualistic. Everyone's making the individual. I don't have to work for my uncle. I can go and work for someone else. It's when you have involuntary expropriation by the state, where they come and take your stuff for the greater collective good. There's no analogy between that and the family. There's no analogy. Because if I choose not to give jobs to my family, that's my choice. But if I choose not to give up my stuff to the state, they're gonna come with a gun and take it from me. I think there's a fundamental difference there.
Got even more expansive definition now. My cousin, second cousin, Uncle Leo's got a mate. I'll give him a job as well. And slowly but surely, okay, that is how a group, regardless of where they come from, can start gaining political power
It's like
as
you
well
have
as
our
economic power
institutions.
in a system, right? But if you're thinking just in terms of you, or just in terms of your immediate family,
Gaining political.
then that's a leg up that you don't have that all those other people do. Gaining political power, right? Okay, that is how a group, regardless of where they come from, can start gaining political power
It's like
as
you
well
have
as
our
economic power
institutions.
in a system, right? But if you're thinking just in terms of you, or just in terms of your immediate family, then that's a leg up that you don't have that all those other people do. And I don't think it's irrelevant, that distinction. I think it's highly relevant for what actually then ends up happening in a system, right? Especially if people are reading people like Ayn Rand and becoming more and more atomized as a result of it.
People are getting. There's just the argument there is just so all over the place. So people have family, and then they gain economic power, and they gain political power. Well, you can gain economic power, but to gain political power, you need the state. Now, she believes in the state, but the state has to respect private property. But if you mean they gain political power so that they can expropriate other people, because let's say they gain political power, but all they do is enforce private property. They just pay for the police to make sure that no one is stealing stuff. Well, that's irrelevant. The political power means you can now take the money, the tax money, and direct it toward your family, your mafia, your ethnic group, right? So so she's against that, but you've got to go in the family political power. Like she wants to block that. She wants to say there should be no political power other than this minuscule state. So what's your argument? That what she's advocating is wrong, or that it's impossible? It's not clear what the argument there is. And then what did he say next?
Then that's a leg up that you don't have that all those other people do. And I don't think it's irrelevant, that distinction. I think it's highly relevant for what actually then ends up happening in a system, right? Especially if people are reading people like Ayn Rand and becoming more and more atomized as a result of it. Okay, admitting.
So what he's saying is that people are reading Ayn Rand and they're becoming atomized. The thing is, you have to argue that if you're an individualist, meaning you decide, I have certain mental abilities, I can, I can engage in private enterprise and succeed, that is the same as becoming atomized. The thing is, you could be against Ayn Rand and be atomized, like have no family, have no, become socially isolated. Being socially isolated and engaging in free enterprise are not the same thing. There is a semantic equivocation there. And you could, for example, live in a nanny state and be social isolated, right? Like here in Australia, yeah. I mean, you see, you can, the nanny state doesn't prevent social isolation. You have to think about like what's causing atomization, what's causing social isolation, and the other thing is, if someone chooses to be part of their ethnic community, that's their choice. But do I have to choose that? Do I have to be part of this group or that group? If I want to be an individualist and succeed, that's my choice, and that I will follow her philosophy. If you want to be part of a community, a church, that's your choice. I don't think she's telling you that if you prefer, your ethnic community or your church and you want to engage in charitable work, that somehow she's against that. She just doesn't, my understanding is she just doesn't think that the state should be doing it. I'm not sure. None of this really makes much sense to me.
Let's carry
Well, you would argue that the organised minority can take on a mass that's maybe 100 times bigger. But I mean, what we're talking about here, we've got an organised minority taking on a mass of individuals, so it's even weaker. So yeah, like in waspish cultures, the organised minority can achieve a gargantuan.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a very good economic book about this by Mancor Olson called The Logic of Collective Action that was published in the 1960s, which was basically basically saying this is a good thing. Like liberal democracy is good because it can be gamed by minority groups in this way. And Olson basically gives the playbook in that book. And here we are all these years later, and look at the state of British politics now for us. It's this minority group and that minority group, and
So that's an argument for Ayn Rand and minarchy, or even more for anarchy. So you're agreeing with me. Great, I love it.
Or in any country. In Canada, there's virtually a kind of Indian civil war taking place, with all their little petty ethnic grievances all over the place. And the atomized native population is just kind of watching this stuff with no way to respond.
Yeah, but the thing is, the atomized native population is not the product of Ayn Rand. Or at least you have to argue that it is, and you haven't. You've simply identified Ayn Rand with individualism. So you see, you've done this kind of a semantic linguistic game where you go, she's advocating for individualism. Individualism equals atomization. Atomization equals the WASP population in Canada. Therefore, Ayn Rand is wrong. But the problem is when you're moving from her individualism to atomization, the reason why the WASP population in these countries is atomized is not like here they're atomized. But I don't think it's because of individualism. They're very socialistic. They're not individualist minded. They love the state. They want the state to do everything for them. They love the nanny state, but they're atomized. And they're atomized because they have no religion, because they don't really have, like the way they've built, the way they built, the cities are built, they've adopted this American style city, which is the suburban city, where at the center it's office towers. So it's basically antisocial, just a workplace, which is completely soulless, shopping malls, again, soulless and designed for consumerism, and car city, where you have to basically drive around and people live in houses. So when you build a city like that, that's a recipe for atomization. Now, then some part of the city will be occupied by some ethnic minority. And because they are minority, they will kind of stick together, whereas the majority will tend to be more dispersed. And they are competing because they believe that the Anglos here, the WASPs, they believe that they have economic advantage, and they engage in ethnocentric hiring. But the way like they develop their culture in terms of like loss of the church, loss of tradition, and lack of communal centers in cities where it's all basically just consumerism that they promoted. You see that they're not individualistic, they're consumerists, which is not the same thing. They believe that they have, because of their larger number, they have economic advantage, and they do discriminate significantly. Like I feel it. Like I feel that they discriminate. I mean, it's so obvious. It's so in your face. The WASPs discriminate against Europeans, like myself, and they group up against me. Like I remember going teaching here English in like my first job, one of my first jobs here. I would come into the teacher's room, and there were a bunch of WASPs with newspapers talking loud about cricket, and they really wanted to rub in your face the cricket thing. You know, they were quite aggressive in your face that I'm not one of them, and they make this kind of sports and cricket and kind of stuff like to signal their collective identity. It's a kind of collectivism. All these sports, right? But in the end, none of it is really cultural. There's no culture. The sport does not provide. So they become isolated because they have a stupid BS culture. These countries have no culture. Like they're kind of colorless and boring. So that's my analysis of it. And it has nothing to do with individualism. You can be an individualist. You can be successful in business and still have culture, enjoy real culture, high culture, and you will feel. I don't feel isolated, even though I'm an individualist and I don't really interact with people because I participate in high culture. I don't feel isolated. Like when I travel, I can interact with people because of my cultural interest. Whereas here I can't talk to people because I have no interest in cricket or golf or any of these BS sports. So I think that's why they're isolated. I don't know why they're isolated, but I don't think it has anything to do with business. You can be an individualistic, you can be competitive, you can be very, like that. And whether it's up to you to invest in culture, invest in religion. I go to church, I feel part of you feel part of the kind of historical tradition. But you watch TV, you expose your mind to all that advertising, all this consumerism. Like in shopping malls, I get panic attacks when I'm in a shopping mall. I hate them. I think they're a recipe for mental damage. And if people feel isolated, that's why, because they bought in consumerism. They bought into the burbs. They bought into the car. They bought into all these things that are psychologically damaging. You can be interacting with people and feel just, like, yeah, talk to these people. I'm like, I have nothing in common with them. Just interacting with people makes no. The question is, do you have kind of some psychological, cultural, historical connection to stuff? And you can be engaged, you can be an individualist in business and feel very connected, or you can be surrounded by people like in a pub and they just go through the motions of conversation and listen to crap music and just look atomized. Australia is just so atomized. I don't know. Maybe that's not how they feel about it. To me, that's why I don't really like living in this country. But I think they're completely separate issues. You can be an individualist in business and you can be competitive and success oriented. That doesn't mean that you can't devote time to cultural activity. In particular, once you get rich, right? You have to choose to do that. You have to recognize there's value in cultural activity. In fact, I would recommend that, like, learn classical guitar. Because I'm selling courses in classical guitar, and so I think people should do that. But I'm being very individualistic in doing that because it's a business. I think they're completely separate issues. You're mixing up issues just because of words, individualism, atomism, and you're drawing connections to things that are actually quite separate.
Fortunately, that political primacy, that man as the political animal, the tribal animal, comes before any economics. It comes before economics. Politics comes first. Anyway, go on, Boris.
Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. I just to anyone listening who's interested in this aspect of it, please do read Kevin MacDonald's last book from 5 years ago, 6 years ago.
Yeah, about the Western individualism. Yeah.
Western individualism and the liberal tradition. It's one of the most illuminating things I've ever read on things like this.
Definitely. Even at 19, I knew I'm not going to meet anyone else like this. This is once in a lifetime.
Rand had died in 1981, but by the start of the 1990s, her novels had become a phenomenon in America. A Library of Congress survey showed that one of them, Atlas Shrugged, was now the second most influential book in the country. The first was the Bible. And the group most inspired by her were the new entrepreneurs of Silicon Valley, including some of the most powerful, like Larry Ellison of Oracle.
On things like this.
Yeah.
Western individualism and the liberal tradition. It's one of the most illuminating things I've ever read on things like this. MacDonald's last book from 5 years ago, 6 years ago.
Yeah, about the Western individualism. Yeah.
Western individualism and the liberal tradition. It's one of the most illuminating things I've ever read on things like this.
Definitely. Even at 19, I knew I'm not going to meet anyone else like this. This is once in a lifetime.
Rand had died in 1981, but by the start of the 1990s, her novels had become a phenomenon in America. A Library of Congress survey showed that one of them, Atlas Shrugged, was now the second most influential book in the country. The first was the Bible. And the group most inspired by her were the new entrepreneurs of Silicon Valley, including some of the most powerful, like Larry Ellison of Oracle. Many of them...
We should probably pause on Ellison, Simon, because he's Mr. T. Blair's one of his, if not his number one backer, his number two backer after Bill Gates.
Yes, he's on his billionaire speed dial, as they say Elon is.
And Larry Ellison, mega rich, right? He's worth the best part of about 100 billion or something. He's hugely rich.
Blair Institute, Elon Musk with his spare time. Musk and...
It's an exaggeration, but he's an infrastructure of the internet guy. So he got so rich. Oracle, right? Oracle.
That is Kraftwerk, Radioactivity from their 1970s.
Children after Rand and her novels. They set up reading groups to spread her ideas. But above all, they saw themselves as Randian heroes.
Let me just mention one other thing that winds me up about a lot of these companies, like Oracle's a good example, actually, is that whatever innovation they had originally, and this is a serious problem in the tech space, in this particular space, in my view, I've said it before, is that they adopt a strategy of mergers and acquisitions, so that they just constantly gobble up any new company any old startup, any like hot new product ends up getting bought by Oracle or IBM or Microsoft or Google now. And they just get kind of like absorbed into the blob of that company. And invariably what they do is that they take something that works, they take something that's more efficient and adding value to the economy from these new startups, the dream of the free market, right, Horace, okay? And they actively make those things worse or shit, or because they don't want them on the market, because it's taking away market share. So a lot of these companies in practice end up being...
Well, you see, the problem is that in I was just watching some lectures by Hans Hermann Hoppe, and he talks about, say, history. You have certain events in history, and you can have two completely opposite explanations of what happened. So he says, for example, let's say the economy at point A is this size, and then at point B it has grown. But also the number of taxes and regulations have grown as well. And the question is it that the economy grew because of the taxes and regulations? In other words, there's a correlation between economic growth and taxes and regulations, or is it that the economy grew in spite of the taxes and regulations? And so if you didn't have the growth in taxes and regulations, the economy would have grown even more. And Hoppe's argument is that without praxeology, both of these explanations, which are completely contradictory to each other, they're equally plausible. Like, there's no way of telling them apart. What you need is praxeology, which is a priori economic principles, which say that it basically makes no sense that the economy would have grown thanks to taxes and regulations, right? Because you need private property to have prices in order to have the optimal utilization of resources and allocation of resources. So what that means, so on that praxeological story, the economy grew in spite of taxes and regulations, growing taxes and regulations, and would have grown even more if you didn't have those taxes and regulations. So here Parvini is saying that these companies are gobbling up these smaller companies, but how do you know? How do you can have two stories? As one is that is the best way, right? So for example, you could say, well, let's say you do a startup, and you think, well, once my startup reaches a certain point, it will be bought by a big giant company. And that's why I'm starting the startup. So if I didn't expect that, I wouldn't have started the startup. In other words, it's quite possible that the startups are always done in the first place. Like some young guy goes to Silicon Valley, gets together with a bunch of other guys and go, look, we're not a startup. And then Oracle come and give us $1 billion. We don't have to make any profit. We just have to make a product that's going to be bought by Oracle and we're going to be rich. And that if they didn't think that, they wouldn't have done it. And you say, well, the Oracle buys it up and makes it worse. But what would be the incentive for Oracle to make that product crap? Let's say the Oracle has, this product is competing with Oracle's product. But wouldn't Oracle be, if this product is better than Oracle's product, wouldn't Oracle be incentivized once they bought the company to incorporate the product into their product, into their original product? You see, from a praxeological point of view, there may be good reason. It may actually be good that these large companies are buying up these startups, because these startups otherwise would not be started, or they wouldn't have, like, for a startup to get the problem for a startup is that they need to find customers. So let's say they have a minimum viable product, and then they develop it, and then they need to start getting customers. And it's very difficult to do that. A large company just has a giant customer base that if that large company buys that small startup, they're able to distribute that product to their existing customers, as opposed to this startup competing with Oracle and having to get all those customers, which is very difficult. So Parvini may be of the opinion that this large company makes this product crap, but that doesn't really make much sense. Like, what would be the logic of that? Does the startup have some, because the idea is that it's like vulture capitalism, like a capitalist buys up the company and then sells off the assets. Does the startup have assets to sell off? If Oracle pays the startup $1 billion for this essentially intellectual property, it wants to make money from it. So it will try to bring that product to market and make it pay money. So it's very difficult. What would be the benefit? Like, the startup is going to compete with the large company. It might, but it's not clear what the situation is. So it's all just guesswork. My point is that it's all kind of guesswork, and you need to kind of dig down more deeply and use praxeology to see whether it actually makes logical sense. Like, as I said, does it make logical sense that the economy grew because of taxes and regulations? From a praxeological point of view, no. What makes sense is that the economy grew in spite of growing taxes and regulations, and it would have grown more if you didn't have these taxes and regulations.
Inefficient bureaucracies that slow down innovation in the long run. They may have been innovating at this point where we're looking at Ellison here in this documentary, but by this point, I would say that they're all a net drag on innovation, because they just buy up anything promising. And
yeah, so because they buy up anything promising, therefore they are a drag.
Turn it to shit. And IBM have been doing that since the 80s. It's basically a zombie company, in my view.
And obviously they lobby the government for advantages of all kinds as well.
So you need a concrete example. Like, it's very difficult to argue with that because it's just hand waving. There's no concrete example. Like, give me a company where, like, show me an example of that? Because you can buy up, let's say, like IBM buys up some technology and makes it into crap. There's nothing to stop from some other company going, well, and the thing is like, I don't understand enough about business, but if you're a startup, it's up to you whether IBM buys you or not. And then if they buy you and you become rich and IBM turns your product into crap, what's stopping you from just starting up again and doing it again? I don't really understand what is the logic of why you would be turning these products into crap. I don't understand. Don't get it. It's too broad and there's not enough detail.
Yeah, exactly. And they use the regulations to make it easier for them, of course.
It's really libertarian for them.
Yeah, so they don't actually live up to their libertarian principles of if they were really free marketeers, they'd be like, all right, there's a new startup competition. That's good, isn't it? Let's let it run.
With all these guys, if they call, from Musk to Edison to everyone, like if they call themselves libertarians, you got to ask, what do they mean by it? Do they mean they believe in that, or they want you to believe? And in most cases, with businessmen, it just suits them for the public to believe it, like they did.
It sounds to me like this kind of tone. It's very leftist tone, and maybe they need to bring someone on from Silicon Valley to explain it to them, like rather than just dismissing it and doing this whinging. We call this in Australia whinging palm. And I've worked with Brits, and they're not all like it, but some of them have this very whiny tone. Just the way they speak, they just sound like they're constantly complaining. And this, to me, it just seems to me like kind of lefty complaining, just because they don't understand it and they don't care. They just kind of like, they think they're libertarian. But if you actually want to try to figure it out, you have reach, find someone from Silicon Valley to say, is what we are thinking correct? Like, we're thinking this is not really libertarian. They're gobbling up these startups. Can you explain this to us? You see, then that would be more credible than just, they're really libertarian because IBM, blah, blah, blah. It just sounds like whining.
Everything by merit and all this stuff. But it's so much more. It's like 1,000 times more complicated.
And that's what we're going to see in this next sequence. It's a kind of projective form of culture. Again, like this idea of the split vision, the noble lie. The elites believe one thing, but they project onto the greater unwashed masses another notion of how to behave.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
I really felt like an Ayn Rand hero. I really did feel like an Ayn Rand hero. I was one. I didn't just feel like one. I was one. I was building the products. I was thinking independent. I was being rational. I was taking pride in what I did. Those are Ayn Rand heroes' characteristics. I was an Ayn Rand hero. I wasn't in the book, but I was an Ayn Rand hero.
Just to give you an example, my 6-year-old boy, his middle name is Rand. And I was talking to someone in a classmate's dad, and I was just saying, we're talking about Ayn Rand in this interview, and he said, I'm a huge Ayn Rand fan. In fact, my girl's middle name is Ayn. And it's funny when you see people, you see companies all the time, called Fountainhead or the Galt Group, and you see little evidence that Ayn Rand has heavily influenced people.
Many of the people here in Silicon Valley were greatly inspired by Ayn Rand. Entrepreneurs who were building computers, entrepreneurs in biotech, entrepreneurs in software, in internet networking. Many here were inspired by Ayn Rand. It presented a vision. It presented a vision of a morally exciting enterprise.
Look at what they've done. They've managed to get millions of baying red cap wearing American magatards to cheer this on, basically, in the name of populism.
God, I mean, I have to say that as a Catholic, one of the big psychological blockages to progress is the kind of anti-money mentality that Neema Parvini and his buddies are expressing. That it is a mindset, right? So Catholics have a real problem with money. Okay, it's a psychological barrier. Like you need analysis. It's Catholics struggle with the desire to be financially successful. There's guilt associated with money. And so I can understand why, for a lot of these people in Silicon Valley, they needed something to justify just wanting to be successful. And maybe, they just became too exuberant about it and started naming their kids. But it's a real thing. And I think Parvini and his buddies are just basically British whingers. They just go straight to, look, Trump tards. It's a completely separate thing. There's no connection at all. Just completely associative thinking. Okay, let's see what he says.
The name of the people against the elites, these people. And all it took was Mark Zuckerberg to be like, yeah, remember that stuff about the 20, forget about that, guys. I'm wearing a red cap now. I've done some working out. I'm truly based on red pill. I've seen the light, guys. Oh, yeah, we fucking love Mark Zuckerberg now. Just watching it work is just incredible.
Yeah.
And,
You say you don't find him wholly sincere?
It sounds like resentment, and this is the psychological, the other psychological aspect is that leftism and socialism are based on resentment. It just sounds like resentment. Like, I don't care about Mark Zuckerberg one way or the other. I don't care. I just focus on myself. I think that there's a kind of I believe in a kind of methodological, I'm not sure whether that's correct, methodological individualism, where I actually get it from Steve Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where he says, well, you have a certain area of control and concern. And if you focus on things you can't control, you're just exerting energy on things that aren't going to move you ahead. If you can control this much, right, that's what you need to focus on, and then you're going to move forward. But worrying about Mark Zuckerberg or Trump, I prefer Trump just because I just don't like the Democrats, and I don't want to be hearing about all the crazy stuff they do. I don't know whether elites this or the elites that, or the populism this or populism that. I just know that, it's gonna piss off the libtards here, the wokeists and the feminists, and I'm like, yeah, great. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's the difference, right? I don't care whether MAGA this or MAGA that or Mark Zuckerberg. I just know that all the Facebook is full of lefty liberals, and there's stuff that I want to do that I'm interested in terms of music and culture and stuff like that. That's basically currently we're stuck on Facebook, and it's the same as what's the other one? That other platform. It's just full of leftists, and it's very difficult to find platforms that are not full of leftists but are related to culture, because the problem with the populist right is that it seems to be a bunch of rednecks. It's very difficult to find more middle class, upper middle class people that are on the right. That's my problem, my particular problem, because I like high culture or upper middle class culture, whatever you want to call it. More classical music, more sophisticated jazz. And currently on Facebook, it's just a bunch of leftists and lowbrow morons. But look, if Mark Zuckerberg goes for Trump and pisses them off, I'm like, yeah, great, good. But I don't really care about him. That's the thing. That's the thing about the individualism, is that this collectivist thinking is you're worrying about stuff that is irrelevant. Like, how is it going to affect you? You've got to focus on the stuff that's going to make a difference in your life. You can make money, you can have friends, you can have a relationship, you can have a great life. Who cares about Mark Zuckerberg? How's it going to change? And being kind of resentful that he's the elite, this elite, that. The question is how, for example, with Twitter, X, the fact that Elon Musk bought it means that there's more right-wing discourse. So that's good. So that's valuable. And if Mark Zuckerberg heads in the same direction and there's more right-wing discourse, that's good. That's actually affecting me. Whether he's a millionaire and an elite is not that relevant as whether what he does adds value, so that, for example, when I sell my guitar courses, I can use Facebook ads, because Facebook is a good way to advertise like music courses. And the problem is there's just too many left-wingers on Facebook. It's been kind of friendly toward the left in that way. And that's a real problem for people like me on the right. Because there's not, other than Facebook ads, it's very difficult to see how you can promote this kind of stuff, educational materials. You see, that's what you need to be thinking about. How can I make money? How can I do business, right? Not elites, populism. It seems to be very irrelevant. It's not useful.
Come on.
But that's the thing, isn't it? There's always a kind of, as I say, there's this, the PR of altruism, where, bizarrely contrary to Rand's own vision, but there's this PR of, we're doing this to free you guys up, but they always have an orientation towards power at the same time.
Power.
Still virtue signaling, even if the altruism thing is just a pretense, it still works on that sort of Western waspish virtue signaling dynamic, where like to show yourself to be moral in some way is more important than almost any other signifier.
But, from a pure Nietzschean perspective, don't the American...
As opposed to what? You're supposed to say, yeah, I'm evil and that's great. I mean, what are they supposed to say? What are you expecting them to say? And what are you doing? On the one hand, you're virtue signaling, and then you're complaining that they're virtue signaling. I mean, it's just normal. Yeah, people will try to put themselves in a positive moral light. I mean, and that they're into power. How are they into power? Are you mind reading now? What specifically have they done? I mean, they have power. Yeah, of course, you get rich, you have power. And Stephen Covey says you should operate in, if you have X amount of power, you should try to use that. You should operate within your area of what you can control, and that should be your concern. So if you're a multi-billionaire and you don't do anything that you think affects society, that's a problem as well. And I agree that it's not that you're into power. You have power. If you're a billionaire, you have loads of power, whether you like it or not. You don't have to, you might not do anything with it, but you have it. It's just a fact of life that you have it. Oh.
People just deserve it. If it's that easy to trick, if it's that easy that Zuckerberg is just forgiven by, I'm wearing this color cap now. I'm a good guy now.
This is going to justify a load of more American anti-English posting now.
At this point, fuck off. I mean, what I'm saying is, don't they deserve? Like, what I'm saying is, you get the leaders you deserve, and maybe
Zuckerberg. I don't think Zuckerberg actually he had power in the sense that he was a billionaire, but I think he had to deal with the state, and he is a businessman, and he dealt it in a certain way. You don't like it, I don't like it, we don't like it. But whether he did it willingly, whether he did it competently, he created an app. He became super rich because he created an app. This app required some intelligence and some wit, but it didn't require him to be a genius or a wise philosopher to know how to deal. Like, imagine you do an app and you're focused on getting that app to be popular, and then it grows, and you keep doing it, and you're focused on that. Next thing you know, you're a billionaire, you have a windfall of cash, and the government's at your door saying, well, listen, you've got to control what people say on your app. And you can argue whether he did the right thing or the wrong thing, but I don't think that designing an app prepares you for participation in politics. Suddenly you are on this political, you have all this power, and if he didn't manage it ideally, I can kind of understand why. Even, to me, he just basically is maturing and navigating, and I can understand when you have the American government at your door. Some people say, like, just don't become rich because it sucks. He went beyond a certain level of wealth and influence and power, where suddenly now the US government is taking an interest in his company. And you think, oh, I would do a much better job than him. Oh, look, Zuckerberg. He's just a guy. Trying to get, hustle. I'm not making excuses for him, but I think anyone would probably make mistakes and none of this is really interesting, to be honest.
Zuckerberg deserves to rule over. Like, if it's that easy, I mean, that is Zuckerberg's face turn is as blatant as it's like in pro wrestling. Big boss man, the big evil guy. Now he's Hulk Hogan's friend. Forget about all that evil shit he did. Let's cheer for him now. Boss man.
When Mr. Fuji became good, but anyway, sorry.
No.
That's probably because it is. And but that's why you couldn't sleep last night. You were so angry that Ben Shapiro and his anti-European moat.
But between those things, and it's kind of been remarkable to witness.
We have no idea what did that.
Wonder if
and the ball's going back and forth. If it's down here and it's headed that way, some
Randian beings, completely free to follow their desires. Now, in the 1990s, the technologies had been built. And in 1991, a leading computer engineer from California gave a dramatic demonstration. He was called Loren Carpenter. He invited hundreds of people to a large shed. On each seat was a small paddle, and in front of them was a giant screen.
We told them nothing for a while. We just left the things on the seats, and people would pick this up and look at it and say, what's that? And then somebody noticed that there's little red and green dots up there on the screen. And this is red and green. So maybe that has something to do with that. That would be that. Okay, there I am. And when that happened, the room erupted. Just totally spontaneous. We didn't say anything.
Carpenter then began an experiment. He projected the early computer game Pong. Each half of the audience jointly controlled the bat on their side of the screen. If an individual held up red on their paddle, a computer sensor picked it up, and the bat on the screen went down. If they held up green, it went up. But they had to operate it together.
When the game is being played and the ball's going back and forth, if it's down here and it's headed that way, some people are going to have to show red to keep it from going all the way to the top. If everybody just showed green, it would slam up the top and the ball would miss. So something happened in that group of people where some decided to show green and some decided to show red to cause it to stop in the right place. And we have no idea what did that.
Wonder if it was just like really low IQ. Maybe it was just like averaged out stupidity created it.
I mean, he's kind of odd figure, Loren Carpenter, but I think this is an interesting point to do. Just a brief digression on journalism and computer games. Because in the run-up to making the series, Adam Curtis, he did a podcast called A Way That Saw BBC audiences are starting to feel mistrustful of programs that feel very thin. And he wants to get people reflecting on what they're told. And he sees these kind of digressional forms of culture coming in because they offer what he thinks of as a kind of liberated sensibility where you can sort of jump around. But ultimately, you need to work out your orientation towards the truth. It's not enough just having the sort of random collage of information. But sophisticated audiences are still wanting this sort of connectivity of experience, which you're seeing, provided in this exercise that Carpenter's set up. At the same time, there's this overhang, post World War II, where we felt, everything was destroyed. We felt optimistic, and we could do so again. And what they're propagating at this point is the myth that in order to rebuild the world, to remake the world, power has been distributed by these computer utopians, such as in this exercise that the Carpenter run. And he feels this is kind of right to explore at this time, because back in 2009, he talks about computer sandbox games, and he says there's a lot of great inventiveness in them. But he notices something about them that they do have this kind of liberated form of digression. You walk around the sandbox in the game, but they all tend to be sort of about periods in history when the people who are playing those games, they're about periods when their parents were probably the happiest. So they're either games about nuclear paranoia from the 60s through to the 80s, or they're kind of kitsch retro games like Grand Theft Auto and experiences, he says. And because of that, culture, since he thinks the early 90s has kind of been dead. There's a bit of reworking of culture, a bit of, mashup, but there's not really much original culture. And we've talked about this before. And
that's what Adam Curtis thinks.
Yeah, that's he did a show, we didn't cover the film, but he did a show in 2009, a theatre show with Punch Drunk called It Felt Like a Kiss. And that was a kind of sandbox entertainment where they took an office building and they kind of populated, if you've seen a Punch Drunk show, they create these immersive environments. You walk in, it's like being in a film set. So you'd be walking into the America of the 1950s, going through this promenade performance in this office building. And he was dissatisfied with the way that worked in the end, because it gave people that sense of a sort of satisfaction. They were making their own stories. They could wander around the building in any fashion they wanted and stitch together their own impressions. But ultimately, it didn't tell you anything. And he's kind of bemoaning, in a way, the this digital democracy, what he calls Google democracy, and it doesn't give people, if you like, a strong place to start from. And he actually says explicitly at one point, that the elites are sort of abnegating responsibility for giving people a strong sense of narrative. He says, what's wrong with elites? Maybe elites are good. Maybe elites actually are the people who take you places. So he doesn't see this sort of distribution of power as progress. It's it's just people wandering around the ruins, as he says. Whereas coming back to sort of, if you like, established kind of bases of knowledge is more interesting than having these kind of these games where increasingly the computer games at that time, I know there was a sort of feminist game, wasn't there? Depression Quest or something like that, And there were these sort of ethical nudge games that were around. He mentioned one that's called A World Without Oil, which was a sort of, almost like a post-apocalyptic scenario game where you have to work out how to live in a world without oil. But to him, he says, it's like playing in a nursery. It's like being hippies. It doesn't confront the structure of power in its essence.
That's really interesting stuff from Curtis. One of the things I can't help but wonder, though, to this point about narratives and looking at this Pong thing here, that when I've been looking at this Pong thing, I can't help but be reminded of this. You know what this is? Come across this diagram before?
Similar kind of principle. Is it some sort of spontaneous?
This is
color?
This is political Twitter mapped red versus blue.
Yeah.
Okay. So the red is right wingers, I believe, and the blue is left wingers, I believe, on this map, or it could be the other way around. Interestingly, looking at it, I wonder if I wonder if this. Do you see that little cluster down the bottom? I wonder if they're the tankies down there. They're all out on their own. But
yeah.
Now, to Curtis's point about the democratization, about social media and Twitter, what if this map that we're looking at here is the narrative? People were mentioning Murdoch the other day. One of the hardest hitting bits of Murdoch is when they cross this bridge, and there are people in red caps and blue caps, all yapping, red team, blue team, red team, blue team, red team, blue team, and it always strikes me that, why was I finding Ike, of all people, more convincing than many of the people who seem to have lost their minds in the past year? And it's because a lot of those people try to bring things back to the party political question all the time, right? Ultimately, they're trying to.
Okay, I'm going to wrap this up. There was some interesting stuff there. I think that I don't know why they reacted negatively to this idea of distributed, kind of emergent, you could say, well, it's a collective, right? So they're complaining about being isolated individuals, but people acted individually, but there was emergent collective phenomena. It contradicted the early discussion about the isolated individuals, because my understanding of individualism is that it's individuals making individual choices, and then this creates an emergent phenomenon whereby, rather than decisions about the allocation of the resources and distribution being centrally controlled, right, by the Politburo, it's emergent. Okay, that's all it means. That's what individualism means. It doesn't mean that you're an isolated individual. And what those Silicon Valley people did illustrated that very nicely. And to me, that contradicts what the commentators were saying about individualism being kind of leading to atomization. It's individuals making their own decisions on an individual basis, and then this creates the market. It's spontaneous self-organization. That's the way to think about it. And then when the state makes decisions, it contradicts that. And that's collectivism. Right? It has nothing to do with family or isolation or anything like that. And then at the end, Parvini showed this diagram of the red and the blue, and I think that is a real issue, because for me, as a business person selling online courses, this is a real problem, because, for example, in terms of music, there is this very strong kind of political red-blue dynamic in terms of, for example, in terms of how you approach musical criticism and music theory and music history, right? People on the left tend to have a very ahistorical view of music. Like, they will just look at a particular period like the 60s and then go, that's jazz. They will ignore the historical antecedents, earlier to that, or in classical music. They generally, for example, the left has very little interest in classical music. And even when they have an interest in classical music, to me, it's not historically informed. They tend to be ahistorical and then to dislike history. Okay? It's just because of the way they think, like they're progressive. So they think history is suspect. Or when they do music, they try to modernize it, they try to dress a certain way, give it like some kind of a progressive angle. It's that kind of stuff. I don't like any of it. I'm trying to avoid it. But it's so prevalent in music that it's very difficult to see how you can avoid it. So in terms of business, it's a real issue. And then how do you, for example, if you want a customer of a particular kind, like you don't want them to be a lefty, like, can you advertise? How do you isolate? Like, for example, I noticed some YouTubers who sell some products, they will mention that they're part of a church, and they regularly mention that, they're Christian. Then, they will mention that I have a family, I have children, I have a church, I have a wife, I'm Christian, we just keep mentioning that. And I noticed that, in the US, these people, they try to target a particular audience, right? If it's a platform like YouTube, which is kind of broad based, whereas, for example, on alternative platforms, there will be more of a right wing angle, and I think that's a real issue, and I think that's something that's being currently kind of churned over and processed by this collective cognitive system. And that's how I think about it. I think it's basically distributed cognition. I really believe in that. I don't agree with the tenor of that discussion, which was kind of like sneering and, talking about elites. These people got really rich and they have power, whether they like it or not, whether you like it or not. They got rich because they're thinking in a certain way, and resenting them is not really useful. if you had this culture in the UK, maybe you would have been one of them, but you don't. You see, the UK has this kind of very stable class system. And here it's in Australia, for example, I can feel it. I can feel when I came back from Asia, the psychological weight of this society, right? And if it wasn't for the internet, like I avoid interacting with people here in Australia because it gets me down. It's depressing. And so I can understand that these Silicon Valley people, they had to develop a culture where they kind of pump themselves up. And then they go, yeah, we succeeded because we pumped ourselves up. Like Peter Thiel, whatever you think about it, he said, look, I was in a university, I was studying for law, and I'm like, this is boring. And he just quit. He had a job in a law firm, and he goes, what do you say about that no one quits those jobs because they're so, good. So when he quit, he's like, his colleagues were like shocked. And he went and he set up PayPal with Elon Musk. And I can understand that they felt that they needed to be in that kind of environment. But I think it's not useful for YouTubers to be sneering at that because it is difficult. It is a real psychological challenge to overcome this culture of the nanny state, reliance on the government, reliance on government schooling, and anti-entrepreneurial mentality. Like in Australia, it's huge, and this country is regressing economically and socially because of that. I don't think you have to be in a particular place, but the thing is, certain places will put you in that mindset, right? So those are the two things I would say, that I think libertarianism is a more entrepreneurship, and that needs to be distinguished from managerialism and technocracy. People confuse, tech bros and entrepreneurship with managerialism. I think they're different, and there's also speculation, right? So the question is whether, for example, Vivek Ramaswamy is an entrepreneur or whether he was a speculator. But they're not the same thing. I mean, one person can be both, but they're distinct things, right? Speculation, pump and dump kind of stuff versus entrepreneurship versus managerialism. And if you equivocate those things, then I think that's not contributing to the discussion. What you need is entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurship requires a certain attitude, a certain mindset, right? And a certain amount of mental energy. You have to kind of pump yourself up to do it. I have to pump myself up to make videos. You have to kind of step outside of your comfort zone. And definitely for Catholics, it's difficult to be success and money oriented. There's a certain amount of guilt associated with that kind of individualism. So there are different perspectives on that. And then the other thing is the red-blue divide, which I think from the point of view of entrepreneurship is important, as I said, because the apps, many forums and apps, they're definitely dominated by leftist type discourse and tenor, and if you advertise, if you promote your business, it's difficult to see how you can kind of like orient yourself to that, because people on the right, the people in the red zone, seem to be actually more kind of in menial type employment. If you're doing something that's kind of online, it seems that you're always coming up against more progressive type person. So that's kind of a problem that I have, and I think there's a kind of collective churning of this stuff, right? And these apps, and that's an ongoing process. And I'm hoping that it's kind of reaching maturation where the right, you don't want to be in an echo chamber, but on the other hand, you want to have your own way of signaling other than mentioning your church and your family. It seems to be a bit odd. Okay. Anyway, I'll finish there. Thanks for listening and talk to you next time.